I couldn't hear everything. What's wrong?
When they have that kind of summit after the game kind of goes off the tracks, and they end up in like a laundry room, and there were such weird vibes in that like laundry room, and I thought that was very like heavy and significant. But the fact that they're in this like vacation house, like this area where it's like, this is all yours, it's open, you're not working, you can do like whatever you want, this like emblem of like radical freedom. And then they end up, because of like the, their insecurities and their problems with each other, they end up crowded together in a laundry room in this very domestic space, associated with household labor. Feels like very thematically like heavy for me. Like it really feels like once things get too real and like their emotions get too involved, too much insecurity and stuff, they end up retreating from this fantasy of radical freedom and into the space that the patriarchal rules that are actually like controlling the aesthetic choices and various life choices they have to make, where those rules actually come from, and they end up partially imprisoned by their own securities, which is in this domestic labor space. And I thought that was really interesting, because like as much as they can embrace these aesthetics and these roles as like liberationary things where like we get to own them, we choose to dress this way, we choose to live this way, this is our choice, totally valid. These are still aesthetics and roles that come from like a very like old school patriarchal structure that is built upon getting domestic labor out of women.
Hello and welcome to the Bravo Outsider Podcast. I'm your host, Craig Midwinter, joined once again by Dylan Ferguson. And today we are super pleased to be joined by the host of the Cinematic Magnification Podcast. It's Chris Fischer.
Get the Pinot ready, because it's turtle time.
Yes, love it. Oh, that's a Ramona Singer zinger. I know that one for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you for doing this. We are going to be talking about the Real Housewives of Orange County, the latest episode. And since there's a little bit of a Bravo drought right now before Real Housewives of Salt Lake City comes on, we're going to be talking about the secret lives of Mormon wives, which I am so pumped about. I'm so glad that this show came out when it did, because it really, like, the timing was perfect and it is excellent. So we've pulled an episode like right from the middle of it. We're going to talk about episode 4 and kind of talk about the show a little bit more broadly as well. Okay, let's talk about Real Housewives of Orange County then. We'll start by getting a brief summary of what happened here. Do you want to tell us from your perspective what happened?
Okay, so if I understood everything correctly, Shannon is still in shambles over a DUI and the lawsuit that followed. And Katie is trying to get Heather to forgive her for whatever happened between them. I think it involved something with paparazzi paparazzi photos, and she also suspects that Gina set her up for this. And also Heather is holding this charity event / fashion show thing.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, no, that's perfect. And a new thing that I want to do is I want to get what you think the number one question that the audience has coming out of watching this episode. What do you think is the number one question that is on people's minds?
Well, coming out of the episode, I would assume that like my number one question personally would probably be like, just how exactly was Gina involved in this entire thing? Because like maybe this was like shown in previous episodes. I of course only watched this one.
Yeah.
But that is like the thing that really interests me.
Yeah, it's interesting that you pick up on, this conflict with Gina as being
I think that's the same question that Gina's asking too, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, true. It's interesting that you picked up on like Gina being maybe the number one question, because so much of the dialogue surrounding this season of Real Housewives of Orange County has been about Shannon versus Alexis. But I agree. I find that this conflict with Gina is really, really interesting. Dylan, I'm curious, what do you think the extent of Gina's involvement is here? Do you think that this is like a master plan of Gina to throw Katie under the bus, or do you think she's a bit more of a bystander?
I don't know. I guess it could be a master plan. I didn't necessarily read it that way right off the bat. I thought that Gina seemed genuinely horrified to be caught in the crossfire. It seemed to be like her reaction was completely almost kissing Heather's feet to get Heather to forgive her, because she seemed to be mortified that this was now coming back to haunt her. And she was so eager to throw Katie under the bus and just burn her for bringing this back up for a second time, because I think everybody other than Katie thought that that card had been played. They dealt with it. They moved on to other things. Katie just kind of face planted the first time she tried to turn it into a conflict between her and Heather. Oh, shit. and now here she is doing it again, because apparently she can't think of anything else to do. So Katie dredges it back up again, and now Gina is getting raked over the coals. And it seems to me like this was not Gina's plan, because her emotions when they're sitting around over wine and talking about it seemed so like genuinely big, and she seemed so genuinely furious that this could like negatively impact her career, which, you know, is a thing, by the way. You're a real estate agent. You do actually need to cultivate friendships with rich people. I think that's like part of the job. And obviously the fact that that was expressed without her permission is something that she's horrified by. But the fact that she would express that makes sense, because that's kind of what real estate agents do, right? Like, you have to know rich people who know other rich people who know people who are in the market for buying houses and selling houses. You just have to make those connections. It's a very connections-based job, from my understanding of what it is, you know? And the fact that Heather could learn that Gina was talking this way and could potentially break off certain connections with her because of it, that seemed to be something that really struck Gina hard. So I don't think she wanted this to play out this way at all.
Yeah, I feel like you're right. I didn't get the feeling that Gina was purely in this friendship with Heather in order to take advantage of their connections, but I think that the emotional reaction that she had, like, it does seem like she hit a bit of a nerve there. Like, there is a little bit of truth that she is wanting to network, which, of course, if you're in the real estate game, you're going to want to network. And now the prospect of that is maybe going out the window, because she's being seen as, you know, this potentially being a relationship of convenience as opposed to a genuine, like, emotional connection that they have. Chris, I'm curious. It was your question. Do you have a speculation in terms of what the answer to that question might be?
I mean, that's a good question, actually. Do I have some speculation? If there was some kind of plan on the side of Gina, it definitely backfired in this current situation. But I mean, you know, also, Katie does have a point. She says in one of the interview scenes, I think, she points out that, like, you know, why would she, like, come into this group of people, right? She's, like, one of the new ones, as far as I understood. Why would she come into this group of people, into this group of women, just to start drama?
Well, yeah, because it's the job.
I mean, yeah.
But
I mean, you know, these shows, obviously, to some degree at least, are set up to cause drama. Like,
right.
But I mean, you wouldn't usually, if you're the new one, go out of your way specifically to cause the drama, I would assume. I mean, there's probably some that would, but yeah, Katie doesn't really strike me as the type, but I mean, I'm not good with humans, so maybe she is.
Yeah, it's interesting that that's your, like, perspective as an outsider, because I could see, like, the human, like, reaction that you would have is, like, why would someone go into this situation in order to, like, stir shit up? But as longtime viewers of this, like, format, that's exactly what people will do. They're going in and they're trying to, like, make their mark so that they can come back the next season and continue to get the paycheck and the Instagram clout, or what, all the trappings of being a reality star here.
Yeah, you have to justify your presence in the lineup. If you can't just show up without having, like, all the history and connections with everybody else and just expect to be friendly and hang around, because then everybody watching like us are going to say, well, what are we watching you for? Why are you part of this? You have to add something. The easiest way to add something is to try to stoke a conflict. The thing that's surprising for me about Katie is that she can't think of a second thing to do, because she already did this thing with Heather at, like, the start of the season.
Yeah. And it's really flimsy too.
Yeah, it's flimsy. And, like, to be clear, I absolutely believe that Heather called the paparazzi on it herself. I don't think that's a lie.
Yeah.
But like, as we've discussed the first time this came out, like, Katie's ironclad receipts kind of suck. Her attack didn't work.
Talk is cheap, motherfucker.
she kind of fell on her face the first time, so that, like, several episodes later she'd be like, gonna play the same card again. It just seems like a very weak move, and just really seems to underline how much she seems like a one and done housewife, really.
And a total misread of the landscape, because obviously Heather is like not interested in revisiting this conversation again. She has put it to bed. She put it to bed last season and is pissed that it's come back up. Why would you bring that back up again later this season, unless you're trying to have conflict with Heather? But it doesn't seem like she's trying to have conflict with Heather. It seems like she's a little bit like flailing now, trying to, I guess, have conflict with anyone, including Heather, but specifically Gina, and she's starting to be played by Tamra. This season is just like a mess for her. I don't know how she can find her way out of this position that she's in, but I guess we'll see what the future brings. I agree, Dylan. I think she's a one and done for sure.
And I think it only looks good for Heather. Heather is dining out on this because it lets her look powerful, right? She gets to occupy the position that she always wants to occupy, of being kind of the figure on the throne that people will like try to come up to, and then she can like just kick them down if she wants to. Like, she gets to be in that position of being like, oh, like, honey, I don't think you want to talk about that with me right now. Like, you're at my event and not the right time. And she gets to look like the bigger, more powerful person. And the same thing with Gina too. She could be like, oh, I hear you wanted like my connections. Like, you better be careful, because then you won't get them. Like, she gets to look very powerful in this position. So all it's doing really is making Heather look the way that Heather wants to look.
Yeah, totally. Let's get into our artistic analysis. Chris, was there any themes or cinematic devices or anything that stood out to you in the presentation of this show?
Well, so there's a few things I noticed. For example, when they're like forest bathing, right? Where they have like Shannon just coughing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they just frame it as just her constantly being like this interruption this entire time, right? That is something I noticed.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, absolutely. Forest bath, is that a thing you've heard of before, Chris? Forest bathing? Have you heard that term before?
No, it's not in fact a thing I've heard of before.
No, me neither. But I just thought it was funny how they're clearly like next to like a bike path. Like, they're just in a park. Like, it just doesn't seem like in the middle, like they're soaking in the middle of the forest. There seems to be like people walking their dogs right next to them and stuff. So I thought that was funny.
Also, like, I found this framing of her when like they show these different memories, right, of things that are going on.
Yeah.
I found that very interesting because, the point of forest bathing is to like perceive everything that's alive around you with all your senses.
Yeah, and that's also what I assumed the point of this thing I'd never heard of before is.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they also say in the show. But, then they show her, in this one scene, they show her looking around, which, if you're trying to perceive everything alive around you with all your senses, then looking around is probably a sensible thing to do. And then as she looks around, as her gaze wanders, they show like all these memories. And they show this alongside this interview of her where she says like, my mind is always wandering and it's hard for me to meditate, right? Like, I don't really know how she is as a person, just from like this one episode. I don't know a lot about her, but what struck me about this is that like this is framing her in a way where like she is constantly somewhere else and flooded with her worries, which, I mean, she is a bit of a wreck if you look at it.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that's an understatement.
Yeah. But like that's just one of these things that I noticed about that scene where like they frame her a bit as like being too preoccupied with everything else to calm down for one moment, right?
Yeah. I think if I may, just you hit on two different things that are kind of related but different that happen at the same time aesthetically, is that Shannon's thoughts and her troubles are an interruption to herself, but also an interruption to everybody else. Like you said, she's also framed as being somebody who's kind of sticking out and up and bothering everybody else's peace and calm inadvertently, just because her troubles are too apparent.
Yeah, she completely disrupts the flow of everything when she is in the room, especially when she's in the room with Alexis. But this season, it's really the Shannon show. Everyone is kind of locked when Shannon and Alexis are in the same room together, and we kind of see how their shit takes over the party towards the end of this episode, even though they really have next to no interaction with each other aside from the very end. But everything comes to a hard stop when they're in the room together. And I feel like this like coughing and the interrupting that we see during this scene with just Shannon present interrupting everyone's kind of flow state that they're trying to get in is a physical manifestation of that, or the portrayal of that.
Except for Jen, because we also get to see how Jen works too, because Jen seems to be totally unbothered, just like has the easiest time just being like, oh, I'm lying on grass. This is awesome. This feels soft. Just oblivious to any problems that are happening in her peripheral vision. Just being like, oh, this is great. I think I'll come back here next year. Maybe I'll use that card that came in the mail that says Dear Card Holder on it. I don't have anything to worry about ever.
Yeah, that's just kind of how Jen operates, though. There's
exactly,
really
which is why it's
not
great.
A lot. Yeah. How about quotes? Was there a quote here that stood out to you, Chris?
Yeah, I did have this one quote. This quote from Gina. Do I have to ride my own bike?
What was it about that quote that stood out?
I don't know. It was just like this really funny quote to me.
Yeah. It was because then she kind of explains because you're like, what do you mean by that? How else does a bike move? And then she's like, I thought it would be like one of those things where it's like I think she seemed to be describing one of those like beer tour things that they do in some like
that's what I
cities.
thought she was talking about.
Yeah, where like everybody pedals at once, but they don't have to pedal if they don't want to.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that being like her go-to experience with bikes. Like that's what a bike is, right?
Yeah, Tamra, or at least I believe it was Tamra. Like, she also says something like, I thought it was going to be one of those bikes that's on the truck where you don't actually have to pedal if you want to.
Yeah.
Like, that, I think, is right back to each other, those two quotes.
I would love to imagine what the extension of this train of thought for Gina is if she were in charge of, say, planning active transportation within a city. Like, what would bike lanes look like if Gina was running the active transportation strategies in some cities?
Yeah.
Let's talk strategy. Dylan, we'll start with you. What do you think the most interesting strategic decision that happened during this episode was?
I mean, I guess we already hashed out the Katie thing, which was, I think, a bad strategic decision on her part, but we've already been through that. Yeah, I don't know to what extent Shannon is being strategic. We kind of hashed that out in the previous episode, but I do think that her messiness is working in her favor, whether that's planned or not. Probably not, though we should maybe give her a little bit more credit than is apparent. Like I said last episode, that scene that kind of hooks the two episodes together of her sitting down with Heather and showing Heather a photo of her battered face that she sent to John and never got a reaction from. That is kind of a strategic move to try to pull somebody who's been getting close to Alexis back to her side. I think that to whatever extent it's planned or not, she's winning the sympathy battle with Alexis by being so visibly falling apart and unconsolable and soaking wet in her emotions, which was the phrase that Carson used in the previous episode. Was just like that works because the fact that she is so present and so hard to ignore, like we discussed in the aesthetics of it, that works in her favor because, like, how could your sympathies not cling to somebody who's right in your face crying? The aesthetics of the episode really drive that home for the audience too. Near the start, when a makeup artist is, applying makeup to her, we get extreme close-ups of her face, of her unmade up, wrecked, sad, post-facelift face,
like choking back tears while she's getting glammed up.
Exactly, and that extreme close-up is a big aesthetic choice to really drive home the idea that you cannot escape her feelings. They're big, they're in your face. Your sympathy is going to be activated, whether you want it to be or not, because this person is going through a breakdown right in your face. And that's a smart aesthetic choice on the part of the show, too. That those kind of aesthetic choices really undercut the idea that these shows are like escapism, because that's the opposite of escapism. It's like, we're not going to let you watch from a distance and I'll have that kind of ironic remove and see it just as like a comedy that doesn't touch you in a sympathetic way. We're going to force your sympathy to be activated by pushing your face into this person's face, and you can't just laugh at them because you're going to be confronted with their emotions directly, and that's going to make a direct emotional appeal to you. Because that's happening, that makes it hard for people to like be like, well, Alexis has a point too, because Alexis can't match that kind of level of real emotion. Alexis just seems to be working on the level of like of strategy and calculation and just doing whatever she thinks helps her case. And then when you have like later when Emily goes in and talks to Alexis, Emily seems to be almost trying to say to Alexis, like, just so you know, everybody's really feeling sympathetic for Shannon right now. You're kind of frozen out just because of that. Like, you're just frozen out, not because we think Shannon just made a better argument, but her emotions are right in our face. This is our friend who's going through shit, and we cannot help but have our sympathy activated. So this is all working towards in Shannon's favor. In terms of like winning the sympathies battle with Alexis.
Totally. And, you know, we're not, like you said, we're not getting a lot of like anything that gives us the opportunity to feel sympathetic towards Alexis, both in terms of like what she's saying or doing, like how she's operating, or the visual language surrounding her story. Like we're not getting those tight close-ups. Everything is like further back, and, you know, we're feeling very, very detached from her. That's a really great call out. Chris, did you have anything that stood out to you in terms of the strategic decisions that are made in this episode?
I mean, I really only have like this entire thing between, you know, where Emily goes to Tamra and tells her about Katie and Heather, but I think we've already been pretty thoroughly over that one, like in general, this entire situation. So yeah, that's really the only thing that I had.
Yeah, but I think you brought up Tamra's interaction here, and I don't think we've talked so much about Tamra's involvement in passing this information back and forth in order to set Gina up. I think that this dynamic of Tamra trying to cause a rift between Gina and Heather and using Katie as a bit of a pawn in order to do that is really interesting. And I don't think we've seen that Gina really realizes that Tamra is behind a lot of this. But I do think it's interesting how she has kind of taken the ball, which, you know, at the beginning of the season, we saw Katie say that this conflict between Katie and Heather is Gina's fault, but the person that's really stoking the fire now is Tamra. She's the one that is trying to make this as messy as possible in order to, you know, downgrade Gina's position. And I am wondering if there's anything beyond just the pure like gameplay of it and just trying to kind of rise up the ranks and do that by knocking someone down a peg, or, you know, if there's more of a long-term strategy that she sees a potential conflict with Gina down the road and she wants to make sure that she's got as much upper ground as she can possibly have. But Dylan, I'm curious what your thoughts are on Tamra's involvement in this.
Yeah, it's classic Tamra in that as soon as she sees like information that could cause a conflict, she doesn't want to be patient with it. She wants to immediately make sure that conflict happens and immediately make sure that the information gets to the person who's going to be upset by it. She's like a switchboard operator, just being like, oh, this could hurt this person, let's plug it right in there. We got to make sure that
you know what you're talking about, a goddamn bitch.
Yeah, and she's just always like, let's make sure the drama happens, let's get it going. But she's also the only person during that argument around the wine table who kind of stands up for Katie a little bit, which is clearly, like you said, just kind of a naked strategy to make Gina's position even weaker, even though Gina doesn't really so far turn against Tamra for it. But she's the only one being like, oh, Katie's got a point there, like, and trying to underline the fact that Gina really is just roasting the person who showed up presented as her friend and is completely throwing her under the bus and backing the bus up and running it over her again and again. that Tamra is making sure that these divisions are happening, not just between Gina and Heather, but between Katie and Gina, and just in classic Tamra fashion, is making sure the fires are very stoked and that as many people are getting as upset as possible.
Yeah, I think one thing that is interesting about how that picnic table lunch or whatever it was played out was that Gina kind of fell back to try to get sympathy on her relationship with something going on with me and Travis. And for me, that didn't really land. I don't know if it was the edit or what, but it didn't really I didn't feel as sympathetic as I normally do towards Gina for this. It didn't feel like it was an excuse for this situation that was really going to land, even though I don't think that Gina is in the wrong in this particular situation. But I feel like her leaning on the idea that her relationship with Travis is going through something right now almost cheapened her position. What did you think about that, Dylan?
Yeah, I agree. It felt kind of like she realized that she was getting too intense, too defensive, too aggressive, and just realized, oh shit, I gotta say something to partially excuse my emotions getting to this level, which could be misread, but also remind people that they have to have sympathy for me too, because I've got a storyline that you're supposed to feel sympathetic about, because you need to have that too. You need to remind people that, oh yeah, I'm going through stuff too. I deserve sympathy too. It felt like a kind of last minute course correction in the middle of an emotional moment to like I said, a realization that she was going too intense and had to do something to kind of temper it and not look bad, not look like she was just losing control of her emotions and getting too hard.
Yeah, totally. Let's talk highlights. Chris, what were your highlights from this?
I mean, I do have one thing, but it's not really related to the story at all.
Yeah.
It's I noticed many of the paintings in the show seem to be blurred out.
Oh, yeah.
It's because they're all just penises.
I assume that's because they
rights
are
issues.
Yeah, rights issues or something like that. Dylan, how about you? What highlights did you have?
I like Shannon saying, I will never, ever be in the same room with her ever again. Well, apparently it's going to happen tomorrow. Shannon is so kind of pathetic and kind of lovable in this. And it's just, there's so many moments where she's like, I'm drawing a line in the sand. Unless I have to do something else. Just I'm only going to pay him half the money, and that's a huge concession. I'm never going to go further than that. I think maybe I'm going to have to pay him all the money. Just those moments of Shannon kind of trying to rally, but just also feeling just kind of crushed by the situation and resigned to whatever she has to do. They hit that sweet spot of being very sad and very funny at the same time. That's just good TV right there. It's the same thing when she goes back to the table after doing a breakaway with Jen, and is like, guys, I don't want anybody to talk about this stuff anymore, okay? And then immediately starts talking about it again, and everybody's like, Shannon, we don't want to talk about it. Stop. And she's like, yeah, guys, stop talking about it, okay? And then also then immediately starts talking about it again. And everybody's like, shut up. You
blew it.
Okay, well, let's keep on rolling
baby.
Into our stars. Dylan, who are your 3 stars here?
Well, we got to give first star to Shannon again. It's as we've discussed. It's her episode. It's her emotions on display. The aesthetics are centered around her. It's the Shannon show still. It's got to be a first star. She's the most fascinating and fun to watch. Second star. Let's give. You know what? I will say I rarely give a star to Heather. She's not my favorite. Let's give her a second star. It is her trip, and I think she is playing it well. She does a good job of handling the stuff with Katie and Gina. Like I said, she really comes off as being the powerful figure, which she wants to be. She plays that well, so let's give her props for that. And we'll give a third star to, to Katie. because I'll never do this again. So let's give her a little gold star there, because that's probably the only time she's ever going to show up at one of my star lists. And she was, so there you go. Enjoy it, Katie.
All right, Chris, how about you?
I mean, 1 star from my end probably has to go to Alexis. I mean, we love ourselves a good drama queen, right?
Yeah.
Those are what drives these kinds of shows. And, besides that, and well, I mean, looking back after like recording this entire thing now, maybe I wouldn't have put Emily on there, but I mean, like Emily she just drew a lot of focus in the episode, for me at least. Like, I mean, this entire Shannon subplot, it was there, but like, I mean, I didn't really pay a lot of attention to that one. So, yeah, and...
I think Emily is a good pick for a star. We haven't really talked about her very much, but I think that like this was a really good episode for Emily, because we saw her getting in there. We saw her like moving information around with Alexis, trying to inform her about her, falling position within the group. And we got a good response to Alexis not taking that information gracefully, and Alexis being like, "Well, I'm not going to go to dinner now. I'm not going to come." And Emily's like, "Okay, bye." Like, not even going to try to convince her to come.
Yeah,
just
that's
like,
for the best, actually.
Yeah. And then we also got a really honest, emotional story surrounding her self-image and like the fashion show and what she was made to wear and how that made her feel. So I think that Emily is a really good pick for a star, because this was a good episode for her.
Yeah, and now I will say I didn't quite understand what she was talking about in terms of her insecurities with what Heather was going to have her wear, until we actually see the fashion show at the end. And she absolutely had Heather dressed as just like a mom, while everybody else was looking like stylish, and Heather's just wearing like these baggy jeans and stuff. And I was like, or Emily's just wearing like baggy jeans and like looking like very unstylish a lot compared to the others. And I was like, okay, yep, you've got a point there. That seems to be like an unfortunate choice that Heather made to not dress you as sexily as the other woman, and because of the stuff Emily's been going through with body image, that makes total sense. So I think we have been getting a lot of good emotion from Emily lately, and it was a good episode for her. I agree with that.
Any other stars, Chris?
I mean, I suppose Shannon obviously was very much the center of attention for one of the 2 subplots in the episode, more or less.
Yeah, for sure. I think my stars, I've got to give a star to Shannon for sure. Just the way that all the energy in the episode completely shifts whenever she is on screen or in a scene. I really, I think that is star worthy, and just love how much nuance there is in her story. Heather wasn't really on my radar, Dylan, but you've got me convinced. I think she does deserve a star, and just thinking about, like you said, how she wants to be at the top of this power structure, and how she's like sitting in this almost Lisa Vanderpump-esque position where she is taking on this mafia boss style role. I think that is a good read. And I'm thinking about the scene that we got at the end where everyone's socializing, and Emily comes to Heather in order to ask whether or not Alexis and Shannon can have a discussion at her event. Like, she seeks out permission from Heather here, and Heather grants it, because obviously she wants this event to be showcased, and so she wants something to happen to make sure that it makes the cut. I really like that she has kind of assumed this role, and it's not something I'd really pegged of her before, but I think that's spot on. That's a great assessment. And Chris, you've convinced me that Emily deserves a star here. I think that we got a lot going on here. Also, Emily's involvement at the end in that scene where she's trying to make a conversation between Shannon and Alexis happen. I think that this was a really good episode for Emily as well. Any go backs on Orange County before we move on?
I think I had something.
Yeah, for sure. Let's hear it.
Oh yeah, one thing that I noted down is there's this quote from Alexis where she said something about how if it was her intent to destroy Shannon, it would be done, which, like, they took that from a previous episode based on the editing. So that makes me ask if that isn't her intention, what was her intention, like, in the context of her saying this, right?
Yeah, that's definitely her intention. I think, like, this is Alexis trying to talk in sound bites. This is Alexis trying to, like, put out some faux bravado there. There's, like, I think that if she does want to destroy Shannon, like, that's definitely her goal. She's saying if she wanted to, it would be done as though she has more power than she does. And that's something that you see commonly. I think that's, like, really a common tone of even the taglines on these shows, where people are, hyping themselves up as being these, a big deal when actually they're fairly limited, or they're on a playing field with people that are just as big fish.
I thought it had more to do with the fact that she was referencing that she hadn't released the Ring videos yet, and that she was planning to keep that aside as, like, her nuclear option.
Yeah, it could be that as well.
Mm-hmm. Which probably have more power not released, because they will just, well, unless there's something very damning, it probably will just, like, elicit more sympathy than anything. But just, like, trying to show that she holds more cards than she's played so far, or more so that John holds more cards than he's played so far, since everybody seems to kind of understand that this is just John playing through her.
Yeah, totally. Okay, well, I'm really excited to talk about the secret lives of Mormon wives right away. Before we do that, I just want to ask our viewers to hit that like and subscribe button if you've been enjoying this conversation. Make sure that you follow us on your podcast platform of choice and leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you in terms of your perspective on how this is all played out on Orange County. Let's dive into the secret lives of Mormon wives. Chris, could you give us a 3-sentence summary on what happened in this episode that we watched?
Yeah, so my summary is, so Macy is taking all the other girls out to Park City, to a penthouse for, like, this girls' night. And then they play this game of Truth Box, where, like, they all put little cards with questions into a box, and then they're read anonymously, and the others have to answer them. And yeah, of course, this ends up causing people to ask some very uncomfortable questions and forcing some even more uncomfortable answers.
What an unfortunate outcome.
And what do you think the number one question that the audience has at the end of this episode is?
So let me just so one question that I personally have is, the Truth Box. This entire thing was, I think it was Demi's idea. Mm-hmm. And what I wonder is, did it backfire on her? Because, she got a lot of flack as well, right? Like, did this backfire, or was this secretly, like, a big brain master play?
Yeah, that's a good question. My take on it is that it was a complete backfire on her, but the idea that this is a master plan in order to elicit sympathy from the audience is a valid question. I lean towards no, mostly because this whole cast is completely inexperienced in terms of this genre. I don't think any of them have been on a reality TV show like this before, so I don't know that they have the long-term vision. But Dylan, I'm curious what your answer would be to that question.
It definitely did seem to backfire on Demi. She probably got grilled more than anybody else in terms of the game as immediate aftermath. So she probably thought that it would be a good forum to allow criticisms of other people in, like, the framing of a game, which is always a fun strategy to try to, like, dig into people and just being like, we're just following the rules. That's what it says on the card. You got to do it. But yeah, I definitely think it backfired on her.
So this is the first time that we've covered a non-Bravo show on this podcast. Dylan, I wanted to get your thoughts on this show. Like, what was your takeaway? Did you end up watching the whole thing? I know it was kind of a tight turnaround, so maybe not.
Yeah, I didn't have time to watch the whole show. I watched the episode 4, and then I skipped right to the end to watch the last episode to see how things end. So I've just got a taste of it. I definitely like it. I think a lot of these girls, like you kind of referenced, are not like super ready for prime time in terms of being reality TV players, but the world that they live in is definitely a really interesting one. It has a lot thematically in common with the world of reality TV we often discuss, but in a way that's a little more like structured and rule bound, because they've got that Mormon church thing going on, which is something we talk about sometimes with Salt Lake City, and which we will be talking about again soon. It is really interesting, the world that they live in, that is both heavily inflected by like tenets of like empowerment and like positivity and female friendship, while also being hidebound by this like very patriarchal structure of being like, you have to wear the garments and like cannot show cleavage to somebody who is not your betrothed, and just that combination of like strict hidebound patriarchal rules with like this kind of like super ego imperative to like express freedom and positivity and solidarity at the same time, is like a really fascinating world, and has a lot in common with like just how social media operates. And these are obviously like social media people, and something in common with how reality TV operates. So it's a fascinating world. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, totally. I think that leads right into what I want to talk about in terms of the artistic presentation of this. It's hard not to compare this to Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, so I'm not even going to, try stopping myself. It's interesting that when we talk about Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, we talk about how we often talk about Real Housewives shows and how they're informed by the local geography and culture, and that's obviously very true about Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, maybe more than almost any other show. It's got the Mormon church as kind of a background presence in all of the social dynamics and all of the interactions that happen here, and every way that those characters operate. It's kind of the church is in the background, even for people that aren't Mormon. I think what is really interesting about the secret lives of Mormon wives is that the church has stepped out of the background and is almost like a main character in the cast, and how it interacts with every dynamic here. There's an episode a little bit later on in this series where they all go to Vegas, and a couple of the husbands and boyfriends go along on their own like Vegas thing, and it's so fascinating to see how the men on this cast are kind of in a spiral, because the social structure that they're used to, the patriarchal structure that they're used to, where they are, the head of the family, they are calling the shots, has been subverted, because not only are these women the breadwinner because they're pulling in so much money as major influencers, but now they've got the cameras on them, which we've talked a lot about how the cameras are this empowering device that women can have on these Real Housewives shows, where they're able to use this lens, the audience looking inward into their lives as a platform, as kind of a judge and jury. And I think that the men know that the power structure that they are used to and relying on is obviously under the microscope in the modern cultural landscape, a lot less so in Salt Lake City. But now that the cameras are bringing the outside world in, they don't have a leg to stand on, and they are struggling with all of their kind of learnt behaviors and perspectives being called into question, and they're like going into a spiral, trying to hold on to whatever power they have, and realizing that the power that they have is not, it's not power that they have like earned in any meaningful way.
Yeah. And I mean, there is like this entire subplot in the next episode. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I did watch this 1.5 hour video essay not just about the show itself, but also the context out of which it comes. And there's like the subplot about like one of the girls gets very upset because her husband goes to Vegas and starts gambling, which is very much not allowed for Mormons. Like, they have this very rules-based society that is, I don't want to say it's a cult, like, you know, unlike with Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, where you get kicked out if you get caught smoking a cigarette. It's not exactly, like, it's discouraged, yes, but you're not gonna be thrown out. And, you know, there's just a lot of virtue signaling going on within the religion as well. Like, we see this in the show. Like, they bring up this divide between the saints and the sinners in that very episode, where like half of the women weren't invited to the baby shower because Zach had a problem with that because they weren't quite as virtuous as the others. And notably, if you actually look into these women, the 4 sinners, quote unquote, they're all divorced, whereas the 4 saints, they are still in their first marriage.
Yeah, and it's interesting to like think about what, you know, it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg question, I think, here. Like, did the experience of going through a divorce inform their, like, maybe more liberal adherence to the Mormon faith, or is that the product, is the divorce a product of those already existing views? Dylan, I'm curious if there's any kind of read you got from what you've seen on this question.
I honestly, I was not aware of like who had been previously married and who was in their first marriage. So I wasn't really looking at it through that lens because I just didn't have that information.
Oh yeah. Let's get a bit further into the artistic analysis. Chris, did anything stand out to you in terms of theme or presentation here?
Yeah, so I do have a few things here. For example, you know, when Whitney and Taylor, I think it was, when they had this discussion upstairs, right? For one thing, when we see it filmed, like, Whitney is always framed over Taylor's shoulder. Taylor isn't framed over Whitney's shoulder, which, I mean, that could be a constraint in regards to space, because, like, you know, Whitney is sitting with the back to the wall, so it's possible that the cameraman just couldn't fit in there. Of course, as I've mentioned before, or like when we were here before the actual recording, that, like, I analyzed The Incredibles and the animation genre allows you to put the camera anywhere. That's not true here, of course. But, you know, it could also be, like, Whitney is being kind of framed as the bad guy in this entire situation. And so, you know, Whitney being shown over Taylor's shoulder, but not vice versa, like, it makes the situation seem a bit more personal from Taylor's perspective than from Whitney's, which is more detached because, you know, we're not seeing it over her shoulder. Another thing I also have is when Demi comes up the stairs in this entire discussion. There's a very specific thing that I noticed about this choice of song, which is when she comes up, the lyrics are, "In my mind, I'm disturbed," which, like, you know, maybe they're trying to say that Demi is maybe not currently in a great state of mind, that perhaps she's not really being reasonable right now, or not in a state of mind where you can really reason with her. So that's the thing that stood out to me in that scene.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't pick up on the lyrics, but I thought that the framing of Demi making the decision to go upstairs was very deliberate. How it immediately before it, there's a comment about, we need someone who is not nice to go up there and like break up this love session. And immediately then they show like Demi is the one person that is kind of nominated to do that. Dylan, anything stand out to you in terms of the presentation here?
Yeah. When they have that kind of summit after the game kind of goes off the tracks and they end up in like a laundry room and there were such weird vibes in that like laundry room. And I thought that was very like heavy and significant. It kind of ends up at being everybody piling on Whitney. But the fact that they're in this like vacation house, like this area where it's like, this is all yours, it's open, you're not working, you can do like whatever you want, this like emblem of like radical freedom. And then they end up, because of like the, you know, their insecurities and their problems with each other, they end up crowded together in a laundry room in this very domestic space, associated with household labor, feels like very thematically like heavy for me. Like it really feels like once things get too real and like their emotions get too involved, too much insecurity and stuff, they end up retreating from this fantasy of radical freedom and into the space that the patriarchal rules that are actually like controlling the aesthetic choices and various life choices they have to make, where those rules actually come from, and where they end up kind of partially imprisoned by their own securities, which is in this domestic labor space. And I thought that was really interesting because as much as they can embrace these aesthetics and these roles as like liberation things where like we get to own them, we choose to dress this way, we choose to live this way, this is our choice, totally valid. These are still aesthetics and roles that come from like a very like old school patriarchal structure that is built upon getting domestic labor out of women, and the fact that their insecurities drive them into that space just like really drives that home for me. And then after, when Whitney, who is getting so like ragged on in there, when she comes out, the camera is sure to point out that there's a piece of toilet paper stuck to her heel. That we've got this little image that combines both shame and domesticity that she's just dragging out with her as she tries to re-enter the fantasy freedom space of like the big vacation house open areas. I thought that was great.
Yeah. Totally. I love that.
Like one thing I had noted down about this shot of her like having the toilet paper on her high heel. At the same time as she's like coming out of like the bathroom that she was in that restaurant, at the same time she's also like carrying the birthday cake. So it was a very interesting juxtaposition. Like on the one hand, she's carrying this birthday cake to the group and she's pretending everything's fine. But then the camera pans down and shows the toilet paper and, hinting that actually she's still in shambles. And also one thing I noticed is, according to the subtitles on Disney Plus, which is where I watched it, when she's like in there, the person talking to her, according to the subtitles, is like one of the producers, right?
Yeah.
So that is a very interesting choice to specifically include that. Because it kind of like, maybe this is trying to spin her as being more authentic, if you will, because, she's not just playing the tears for the camera, she's even still crying when she's talking to, like, the director. So that is something that I noticed about that scene as well.
Yeah, I think the choice to show this, like, fourth wall being broken with her talking to the producer is interesting. It's a convention that we have seen emerge fairly recently on shows like this, where it is able to like express someone, like you said, being in shambles or falling apart because they're the world that we're used to experiencing them in has like been broken, and they are broken as a result. And so, yeah, I think that including that is really effective.
Yeah, now that you mentioned it, I'd totally forgotten that she was actually carrying a cake in that scene. And I mentioned I watched the last episode too. There's like a weird resonance between them. Because the last episode, we also get Whitney bringing out a cake, this time which has her pregnancy test, the actual piss stick inserted inside it. And which is another great moment of having this like celebratory icon, which has inserted within it this very personal, very domestic, like slightly misted with a hint of shame, like thing stuck in the middle of it. That's another great image, which rhymes with the earlier cake image where she has the bit of toilet paper stuck to her heel.
Yeah, totally. Let's get into our. Oh, sorry. We need a quote from you, Chris. What quote stood out?
Oh yeah, one quote that stood out was from Jessie. Can you DoorDash garments? Right? Because like Jen forgot her garments, or one of them played it like she, in air quotes, forgot them. Like Jen is like one of the more rule following in the group. And so she then suddenly just forgets her garment on this girls' night. And then Jessie just goes, can you DoorDash garments? Which, that was kind of a funny quote. But, on the other side also, again, it's this very rule-based system that they have around garments as well. Like, you're expected to wear them pretty much at all times. And anything that is so short that you can see the garments is considered immodest. And I think it has some spiritual meaning as well. like for going in the temple and everything, you're not just expected, you pretty much have to wear them.
Yeah, I thought that this was a really interesting quote as well, because at first I was like, that's like a funny line, but then I thought, well, just thinking about the culture here, that might actually be a thing. Like, you might actually be able to DoorDash garments in Utah. Like, that would not be surprising in the least.
Yeah.
You know, it's the dominant religion in the state by far. So, like, I'm sure that you can DoorDash other, you know, religious items elsewhere. So why wouldn't you be able to DoorDash?
Probably.
DoorDash garments?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think Salt Lake City is also one of those like big startup cities too. Like, it's so I could definitely imagine somebody being like, this is this is our Mormon startup. We DoorDash garments to you.
Yeah, totally. I think that also kind of like touches on something that I wanted to talk about, that I've seen some conversations online about this show and people being like a little disappointed because their expectation going into this was about it was going to be about a group of women who are, you know, bucking expectations and like being empowered, and their read on after watching this was that they are not. But that is a bit of a contrast from what I saw here, because I think that analysis doesn't take into account where their baseline is, like where they are starting. I feel like they are absolutely kind of bucking expectations and shifting, you know, the power. It's just, you know, they are so used to being in a society where they are so much further behind than, you know, an outsider might be, that it's hard to see their attempt at grabbing power back from the men in their lives as being, you know, an empowered move, because, you know, our idea of where the baseline is as a, you know, a non-Mormon society, North American society, is so much further.
No, I was going to say, it is kind of hard to see it as a failure to establish any real freedom, in the sense that it feels like nobody, unless I missed something in many of the episodes I skipped, nobody like separates from their partner, or like nobody like really contradicts anything their partner does. It seems like they just, the final theme seems to be Jen like moving to New York with, I think Zach was her husband's name, the blonde dude who was like going to medical school, who she's like supporting, and then he gets
cousin.
Yeah, and then he gets the last word by being like, when she's like, maybe I'll miss my friends, and he's like, I think they're not that important actually, and that's like that's the last word of their relationship. That kind of felt to be like a you know, legs getting cut from under you moment of being like, yeah, they're just going to go back to the way it's always been, aren't they?
So I am wondering what you think. Even if it's not like a complete win, even if they lose, I still think that there's value and power in seeing that story.
For sure. Yeah. No, yeah, I get that.
Let's talk strategy. Did you see any sort of strategic decisions that were made here?
Well, no, not really. I mean, there was this entire truth box thing, but I think we've already covered that pretty well. Yeah, besides that, I didn't really... I mean, I suppose there was also Demi inserting herself in this Whitney Taylor conversation.
Yeah, I think that is probably the thing that stands out to me in terms of strategy. Just how Demi operated throughout this whole episode, from like bringing up this truth box. It was clearly an attempt to try to go at Whitney, and it backfired horrifically on her. I don't think you guys saw this, or maybe we did get a flashback, but Demi has a beef with Whitney over the fact that she was given a box of Fruity Pebbles at this baby christening, because she was like outing some sort of like Fruity Pebbles sexual like activity that Demi and her partner had, which I don't know what that is. I'm curious, what do you think that is? Like, do you have any idea?
The obvious thing that comes to mind is that she's getting eaten out with like Fruity Pebbles inside her. That's like the flavoring she's using. Nothing else comes to mind. I don't know what else you would do with them. You could put them in your ass, but that's kind of gross. So I assume they're going in the vagina. I don't know what else that would be. Fruity Pebbles is like, wouldn't be my first choice because like the sugary coating and like I think has the coloring like mixed in with it, so the coloring would be coming off, and then often those synthetic colorings, when they come off like together, it doesn't create like a rainbow swirl. It creates like a brown muck. So I feel like you could maybe use a better breakfast cereal in that situation, but maybe I'm completely misreading what she's doing with the Fruity Pebble.
Yeah, that was my guess as well.
Interesting
Chris, do you
branding
have
opportunity.
Another guess?
I don't have another guess. No. Urban Dictionary says that it's when you put raspberries in your ass and you fart it into your partner's mouth, but I don't know how trustworthy Urban Dictionary is 100% 11-year-olds making stuff up. That's not a source.
Certainly in this regard. I mean, certainly in this regard. I mean, anyone can add stuff there. Like conflict of interest. If you look up conflict of interest on Urban Dictionary, one definition you will find is Google Chrome having privacy settings.
Let's get into our highlights. Chris, any highlights that you've got from this episode that we haven't talked about?
Well, one thing that I couldn't help but notice throughout the entire episode is just how exhausted Michaela looks. She's 23 years old,
and she's the youngest one.
Yeah, and she just looks so tired and so exhausted. And, I don't think that's just the result of one night of sleeping poorly. Like, yeah, she's like one of the quieter ones, but I think there's just a lot going on with her. Like, you have to consider, actually, when she had her first kid, she was 16, and the guy who knocked her up was 21, which, I mean, Utah apparently has surprisingly liberal consent laws for US standards, but even there that is illegal. But no charges were filed, and instead, she went on to marry him. And I'm sure that does wonders for your mental health. So, yeah. Like, there is this photo they show throughout the show where she's holding her first child, and she looks so young in that photo, right? And if you contrast this with her throughout the episode, she just looks so completely tired and exhausted.
Yeah, totally. I think that I was kind of struck by her as a cast member as well, because I feel like over the course of this season, she is the person that we learned the least about. But the fact that she is so young, I don't know. It makes me want to know like more backstory there. Dylan, do you have any highlights here?
I was really delighted when we got a little shout out to the video of Whitney dancing when her child was on a respirator, because I remember encountering that video in the wild and just being like, this is somebody doing a bit. Like, is this actually somebody like really doing this genuinely? No way to have an actual baby in there. Like, this has got to be a joke. Like, it was a pretty funny video when it came out. I remember seeing that, just scrolling through and just having a video of somebody being like, my child contracted a life-threatening illness, now my baby's on a respirator, and doing a little sexy TikTok dance. It's just the tone is so bizarre. Like, it's the best of TikTok, right? When you have these like insane tones that you just can't put your finger on. So I was delighted to be like, oh, it's her. It's the fucking RSV baby dying and I'm dancing woman. But it does show you something about like what they're struggling to do, because they are like, in a way, I think, try to use social media as something to replace their religion with, or like something else to be a new lodestar, instead of just constantly trying to like please God and like the religious authorities or whatever. Now they're trying to please the algorithms, and I think they maybe find that in some ways a lot more freeing to do that. But that's also like doesn't have the same kind of rules that a religion does, and I think you kind of see people who grew up in a rules-bound society trying to find a new lodestar, a new focus, and struggling under the fact that it doesn't have strict rules that tell you what to do. Like the algorithm and popular opinion are just not codified in a way where you could just immediately know, oh, this is going to play well, this is not going to play well. And sometimes your attempts to just produce content are just going to come out really weird, especially if you're just not used to trying to figure out on your own what works and what doesn't, because you were raised around strict rules. So that all kind of made me feel for her too. Like, obviously I'm sure she was going through shit when that happened, right? Nobody wants their baby to be on a respirator. So obviously I don't want to just laugh about it, but the fact that she's really struggling to read like tone and see how her intention is going to show up, it is a little like almost charming, that it's like, oh well, you really are just like kind of trying to feel your way through this, like we all are in different ways, but it's just like an extreme example of like trying to feel your way through how to present yourself to the world by using, you know, TikTok as like your guiding light when you're trying to replace religion with something.
Yeah.
And it's just, it produces awkward results.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I picked up more specifically on mom talk, the idea of mom talk as this group being that replacement for religion. There's so much talk about like doubting someone's allegiance to mom talk. Like, do you really have the best in mind for mom talk? Is this, you know, there's a lot of talk about how good of a participant in mom talk you are. And I thought that was really like a parallel to a lot of the discussion that we would see about, you know, how good of a Mormon you are, and, you know, where you're rated in terms of like being a good Mormon. Yeah, I thought that was a really, really interesting conversation that goes on, because yeah, it seems exactly like a surrogate for religion for some of these women. Okay, let's talk about our stars. Chris, who are your stars from this episode?
On my end, that's gonna be Whitney and Demi for sure. I mean, you know, a lot of focus was on them in this episode, and I suppose Taylor to some extent too. But like, it was mostly Whitney and Demi.
Yeah, I think that they were definitely the subjects of this for sure. Dylan, who are your stars?
Yeah, I give first start to Whitney. I like her. I find her easy to watch. She's unpredictable. Like, I like the way that she just like walks out of a situation she doesn't want to be in, but does it with like a kind of plastered smile on her face. She's just hard to read, hard to predict, and I appreciate that quality, and I appreciate her bizarre social media content. So Whitney was the one that I was most interested in watching, like that I was the most like engaged with being like, what's she gonna do next? After that, I also really liked Taylor Ricky Bobby, or whatever her name is, the one that has three men's first names and no last name.
Oh yeah, Taylor Frankie Paul.
Right, that's the one. Yeah. I thought she had a good presence too, like a good intensity that a lot of the others didn't really have. You know, like when Demi was trying to come off as like tough and threatening, it wasn't really selling it. But Taylor had more of like a genuine intensity. I like that she apparently was doing like Mormon swinging, which was it sounds to be like extremely lame chaste swinging, but still trying something different anyway. So so good for her. I guess Demi will get a third star because as we've discussed, she was doing stuff, making things happen.
Like, you know, this entire like Mormon swinging thing, like in that video that I watched, it was mentioned actually that this is surprisingly common within the religion, because it's very common for Mormons to marry quite young, right? Mm-hmm. Like, usually for men it's around 20, for girls it's often 18, and sometimes even earlier, as was the case with Michaela. And, you know, the main reason why it's usually in the early 20s for men is that men are expected to go, like, on this mission to somewhere to, like, spread the word of Mormon. And so they usually pretty much marry the first person that they ever seriously date. And so they never have this experience that others have, mm-hmm. where, like, you know, they have time to figure out who they even are, because they pretty much go from being in school to being parents.
Yeah.
And so that is why swinging and open relationships apparently are very common within mm-hmm. their culture.
You know what? Which they should be. Like, that's why I say, like, more power to you, Taylor, because you're absolutely right. Like, I think it's very sad that they go to go from high school to being locked into a family. It robs you of so much opportunities to explore the world and explore what connections with other people can be and can look like. So, take any opportunity you can to try to explore relations with other people. That's what I say to all our Mormon listeners out there. Go get swinging.
Yeah. Also, I don't know if you've heard of this concept, but like there's allegedly this thing that Mormons do called soaking.
Oh, I've heard of soaking. Soaking is hilarious. Craig, have you heard of this?
Yeah, I've heard of this.
Okay.
Yeah. For our viewers who haven't, check it out on Urban Dictionary.
That's like the one Urban Dictionary listing that it's like, that's a real thing. It's the only one that was not made up by an 11-year-old.
I think we covered my stars pretty extensively, but I think Whitney is probably the number one star of this episode for me. Number 2 would be Demi, and number 3 is Taylor, Frankie, Paul. Fascinating for all the reasons that you guys had mentioned. We're going to wrap things up. Before we do, Chris, do you want to just let people know about your podcast?
Yeah, sure. So I make this podcast called Cinematic Magnification, as mentioned earlier. And basically, I take a movie. Currently, I'm working on The Incredibles, but who knows what I'm going to be doing after that. And I take this movie and I cut it up into 5-minute segments. And in each episode, I take this 5-minute segment and I overanalyze it in great detail. Like, I go on tangents if I can think of anything interesting that is only tangentially related. Sometimes I just, go on a rant or something. And so yeah, that's what I do pretty much. Currently, next episode might not come out on Friday as usual because this one's gonna be a double feature, so it might come out next Friday. But yeah, that is more or less what I do. And yeah, I hope you check it out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. We'll have links in our description to where you can find that. Dylan, thank you for doing this. As always, you want to let people know where they can find you?
Yeah, if you're interested in my takes on movies, I've got some writing on my Substack, Dylan Ferguson, Dylan. You can hear me talking about horror movies in back episodes of the podcast, Mind Over Splatter.
Awesome. I'm Craig Midwinter. As usual, you can find me on our Instagram and TikTok at Bravo Outsider. I'll be in the comments here. If you've got an opinion on this, be sure to leave it and let us know why we suck. Until next week, keep on wifing.